You are all familiar already with this pattern, which is known as Mother's Symbol. You are probably familiar also with another design, double triangle, square and lotus in between. We don't have it here, which is Sri Aurobindo's symbol. Would you give me the Savitri? Thank you. You're familiar with this, which is called Sri Aurobindo's symbol. Now, you could ask yourself, why is the symbol given so much importance? And you've seen already in the titles of the themes of discussions, everything is centered around the mother's symbol. First of all, why is the symbol so important, and why this symbol, and what does this symbol really mean? And I propose to explore this a little bit before we actually enter into the specifics of the symbol itself. Because here we find the secret to deep occult and spiritual knowledge, which has extremely practical implications. When we speak of a symbol generally, you've seen logo of a company is a symbol. The flag is a symbol. You go to the United Nations building, you will find flags of many countries. What's the point of putting up those flags? It represents the multinational character of what the UN is, isn't it? Look at the flag itself, the design on it. What's the point of that design? Each country has a different design. Let's look at the American flag. What does it mean? Why those colors? Why that number of stars? And if you think about it, there may be a rational reason given, perhaps the states, the number of states. But the effect of that symbol, the flag on you, when you look at the flag, what happens in you? A surge of patriotic energy. The symbol was created in a particular way. It could have been created differently, perhaps with a different pattern of colors. But because you have an association with that symbol, the symbol has a power on you. If somebody burns the flag, you consider it a criminal act. Why? Have they actually destroyed the country? It's just a piece of cloth, come on. But no, it tears something in your heart. Because the act of burning or tearing a flag for you symbolizes tearing something which you cherish or value. And it's not just an idea, it's an experience. It tears something in your heart. It upsets you, it destabilizes your emotions, isn't it? And the people who do that to you, do it knowingly. They don't think, here's a piece of cloth, let's burn it because we're not interested. They do it because they know it will provoke you. What you see in the symbolism is the power to represent something which is much more than the symbol. An entire country is represented by a piece of cloth and a pattern of colors on it. Let's push this a little further. What is a text printed in a book? You go to a caveman's paintings and you see certain symbols. Primitive. But the same text represented in a language that you know, you read it and it has a meaning for you. Right? Someone else comes, let's say 1,000 years hence, looks at the same text, does not know its meaning, doesn't mean anything to them. Every letter, every word symbolizes something. In the act of reading, it communicates knowledge and perhaps even an experience to you. You're driving on the highway and you see the symbol of a chain of food, McDonald's. And it means something to you. At a subliminal level, it attracts your attention and prepares you already, triggers your hunger pangs perhaps. You know, the classic Pavlov response. You ring a bell and the dog starts salivating. And the scientist says, there's a hard wiring in the brain. No, it's not that. The dog knows it. The bell means food. It feels it. It's not machinery. The physical act is triggering an emotion and a thought. Or conversely, your emotion and thought you have represented in a physical form. That is what we call a symbol. So Sri Aurobindo explains this. He says, a symbol is the form on one plane that represents a truth of another plane. Okay? A physical form representing an emotional or mental power, force, idea. When you're crossing levels, gradations of consciousness, representing in a lower form something which is on a higher, that's what you call symbol. And then he generalizes this. He says, but generally, all forms are symbols. And this is something extremely important. We're going to explore it a little more as we go along. Let's look at a few examples. He says, this body of ours is a symbol of our real being. And everything is a symbol of some higher reality. And we're going to explore this a little more. But then he says there are 4 kinds of symbols, broadly. The first is what he calls conventional symbols. He takes the example of the Vedic rishis. They describe light as cow, because the same word is used for both, go. And once you've made that association, Sri Aurobindo explains, the symbol becomes active, like the flag. You drew an arbitrary pattern which to you meant something. In America, it meant something to the founding fathers. If today you had sat down and decided you might draw a different flag, representing those elements of thought or emotion, but maybe in a different pattern. But once it's done, it acquires a force which then sustains. The second symbol he calls life symbols, which are not artificially chosen, but derive naturally from day-to-day life and grow from our surroundings. For example, the mountain. At least for the Vedic rishis, it represented the journey, the upward climb. In our own experience, we have in our dreams natural symbols emerging. All of you would have had some experience in dream of the train is about to leave or the flight is about to leave and you find you have not packed your bags or you have not bought the ticket or you are not ready somehow. You've had experiences like that. Variations depending on where you grew up. Planes are not so rare for if you're older, but trains, buses, cars, perhaps. And what does it mean? In the dream state, if you experience what that feeling was, some opportunity, something is going away and I'm not ready to catch it. I'm supposed to be on it, but I'm off and I've missed the link. And in your dream state, the bus, the plane, the car becomes a symbol of an opportunity or a forward movement from which you are lagging. All dreams are symbolic. They take images from your daily life and represent a state of your internal consciousness. Now, I just had an email from somebody who wrote, so it's an example that comes forward. She said, I saw in a dream that you were eating chicken. And I said, here's a vegetarian fellow eating chicken, what's wrong? And she interpreted it as me doing something, reading or studying something which was not quite comfortable for my nature. And it was true, I was reading something which was very disturbing. But she caught it, symbolically represented as something which I would not normally accept, which I would normally reject as taking in reading. It's not food, it's reading, taking into consciousness some information, some experiential content, which I would be very uncomfortable with. And so it is ingesting as food. The symbolism is in the eating process. Interesting, isn't it? So these are life symbols, and we use them all the time. In our vocabulary, in language, we're always using words which represent symbolically something. When you say, he plowed through his difficulties, you have the symbol of a plow cutting through heavy resistance. And it adds to the language a power of communication, of an experience. Because there is no word for that experience of plowing through. But life gives you an experience, you make a simile or a metaphor, and that's a symbol. Without similes and metaphors, you could say very little of real value. So basically what you're doing in your language vocabulary, which is limited, you are drawing from life power, images, experiences, representing through symbol. Every word we speak in any language is also a symbol of what? A thought or a feeling. So here he speaks of this mental symbols, numbers or alphabets. Once we have accepted them, they acquire a power. But why did they choose to make the sound A in this way, B in that way in the Latin from which the English derives? Was there a reason for that particular shape? If you go deep enough, you will actually find a reason. Because the sound has a certain force of its own. And if you had to represent a sound in a form, you would tend to make a form that captures something of the force of the sound. And the same with numbers. But once that link is made, the form has a force of its own. When you're reading a book, all you're doing is reading a scroll of ink on paper. But in your mind, you are pouring in a series of ideas and emotions, evoking experiences. That's the power of the symbol. It can lead to an experience in your emotions and thoughts by the trigger of a physical form, which in itself is just a little bit of ink on paper. There's no other value. And then he makes one more symbol, which is a category of symbols. Symbols which have inherent value or power of their own. And an example is the sense of space as a symbol of the infinite, or ocean as a symbol of vast awareness, or a whole plane, a world of consciousness. So in the dream state, for example, when you find yourself journeying on an ocean, what's the feel you have? And you just have to feel and describe what does it mean to you as a symbol? A vast domain, unexplored, infinite, and you're moving forward. It's natural, it's obvious. If I ask you to visualize infinity, how would you picture it? Space. You don't think of desert, you think of space, infinity, naturally. So these are some examples Sri Aurobindo gives, but we now go into the deeper truth of what he said earlier. All forms are symbols. Our body is a symbol of our real being. Everything is a symbol of some higher reality. And this is where we get into the most interesting part of it. Because remember, a symbol represents something which you otherwise could not capture. And the symbol capturing it, you can move the symbol and provoke reactions because of the link. Like burning the flag provoked a reaction in you. Or raising the flag provoked a different reaction in you. Lowering the flag provoked a different reaction. It's as if once it's attached to this physical object, I can play the object and provoke that response. There's a very interesting incident narrated in a little known book, but I would recommend it for you to read. It's called Rolling Thunder. It's the story of a Native American healer. And the author is observing this, learning from him. And at some point, the healer demonstrates this. He says, "Let me show you how I control lightning." He takes, I think it's called a stink beetle. He flips it upside down, takes a feather and tickles its belly. Now the interesting thing is, the author notes, every time the feather tickled the belly, with each stroke, there was a stroke of lightning. Kruk, kruk, kruk. You see what that means? Somehow the beetle and the feather tickling its stomach is linked to an operation up there in the clouds, and by playing here, you make that happen. Now, if you think about what that is in our lives, it's quite familiar. You take the remote control, push a button, your TV comes on, you push another button, channel changes. Why? There's a link. The link is invisible. But your remote control holds in its buttons, symbolically, the powers within the television that you are accessing and playing with. Okay? Now let's extend this a little more. Your hands moving and pushing buttons, what are they? Representing an intention in your thought. I want the TV to come on, my hand reaches, pushes a button. My hand is not my thought, is not my intention, it's a representation in the body. Okay? Go back one more step. If I had to have a body, what kind of a body would it be? Let's assume you are a pure consciousness. No forms at all. You're just aware, pure aware, hanging in empty space. And now you want to act in the domain of life, do something. What would your awareness feel itself doing? As if a part of its awareness reaching out, projecting a nudge to push, right? An extension, push. If you really want to do something with matter, it's not enough to keep pushing. You want to be able to pull, stretch, squeeze. So you need two movements of energy reaching out to grab. Push, pull, squeeze, modify. Okay? So when pure consciousness tries to enter into the material world and grab and play with matter, it puts out these two energetic streams. And the energetic streams organize themselves, have to become material enough to push material objects. So when they organize themselves in life tissue, they become your arms. Your arms are symbols of these two movements of energy reaching out to manipulate. Now you see why in the Sanskrit language, palm, the word for palm, is the same for action. Because your arms represent your consciousness power of action reaching out. There's nothing else. Your arms have no other meaning. Of course, if they are inherently the urge of consciousness and the power to reach out and act, even if they don't grab material objects, they still act when they make a gesture. And so the position of your hand, fingers moving, are symbolic of an intention. And so you can make signals with your hands, right? You communicate. But not just communicate, you can articulate in matter an intention which makes for an outcome. And this is the principle behind mudra. You take special positions of the hands which have specific results and outcomes. Right? You're familiar with that idea. Why? Because they represent streams of energy of your consciousness, now embodied and expressing, acting, and actually operating on those energies here in life. There has to be this part of your consciousness also. Remember, we are defining the human body. There has to be this part of the consciousness which wants to experience through the senses the world. And it has to be a focal point. As it looks, hears, feels, tastes, it's all in one bunch. And also, when it tastes, it can take in eating. The movement of sensation and eating is all senses are here around the head. But also this center of consciousness wants to move around. So it puts forward a projection of something by which it can push around objects in order to move around. And those become your legs. And so on. all the human body design is a pure spontaneous expression of the activities of consciousness wanting to express itself and operate in the world. If you think about it in these terms, it makes so much sense. The whole body is a symbol of your consciousness in action. This is the reason why all bodies are similar, and not just human, even animal bodies. Similar in their morphology overall, in their overall design, 2 arms, 2 legs, or the horse you will say, well, you don't have arms, 4 legs. But the sense of the energy in the 4 arms, 4 legs is similar to the human arms. The sense of the energy in the back legs is different. And every part of the body is glowing out, emanating a certain quality of energy of the particular operation of consciousness that it embodies. Now this comes to something very profound. I'm not sure we need to go too much into it, but just as a hint. In certain occult magical rituals, they will focus on certain parts of the body or certain animals for the particular quality of consciousness they represent. And those of you who are from India, traditionally based, you would know there's a very special ritual which is done where they worship the hind part of the cow. Now that might look weird. You want to worship, you come to the face of the cow, you're talking to the creature. No, but the goal is not the fellow inside, it's the quality of consciousness and the particular quality that is represented in the hind part of the cow, from where she gives milk. The sense of plenty outflowing. And there is the particular vibration associated with that plentifulness of Lakshmi. So the Lakshmi puja on the cow is done in the hind part. Very interesting. Because you're focusing on the consciousness and the quality of consciousness. And the same thing in the human body. Every part of our body is symbolically represented, even the form of our ears, the nose. You could ask a very simple question: why do we have 2 nostrils when finally they all join into one passage that goes to your lungs? Right? There's a symbol there, energetic, if you could go into what it means. And if you study a little bit, you'll discover your nostrils actually flip in their operations. Sometimes the left nostril is more active, sometimes the right. Why? Sometimes one is blocked, the other is operative. And you'll notice it varies according to the state of your body energetically, and sometimes even the state of your mind. If ever you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night and unable to sleep, observe your nostrils. Very likely you are breathing from the right nostril and not the left, which activates the nervous system. If you force it to switch by blocking the right and breathing from the left, you put the nervous system into a more passive state, you'll find yourself easily going into sleep. When you've eaten food, the right nostril will activate. Now, this is not about air flow, this is about energy flow. And air is a symbol of the energy flow. When you breathe in, you're taking in prana, life force, not air. Air is the vehicle for prana. And if you can somehow reach out and access the prana directly with very little physical air, physical oxygen, you can still breathe in prana and your life systems will function. This is what the Hatha Yogi does when he goes into a kind of a semi-trance and is buried alive. No airflow or limited air, as long the little that is there in his little box, and he stays there for 2 or 3 days and doesn't die because he's accessing directly the prana. But once you have access directly to the prana, your breathing content is unimportant. You can draw as much energy as you want without needing oxygen for the chemical reaction. Push the logic one more level. Even the chemical reactions are symbolic of energies that the chemicals represent. Everything in the material world is a symbol. And upon this is based the whole science of occultism and symbolism of various kinds. If you had to, for example, call upon a particular quality of consciousness represented symbolically by one of the planets, let's say Mars. Mars is associated with vitality, energy, strength, courage. Mars is associated with the color red, with certain materials which are reddish, flowers which are reddish, objects which are of a certain type. If you want to invoke or evoke that particular quality, well, gather those objects, arrange them in a particular way in a symbol that represents Mars. And this is the basis for the whole ritual of the Mars puja. And once arranged, just as the flag provoked responses within you, once arranged and the manipulations here provoke responses in the environment. Now the whole science is fascinating. It is occult because these connections are hidden, they are not obvious. This knowledge of the arrangements and their effects is not obvious. But if you dig a little bit behind the scenes, you will find, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can even rediscover it. You don't have to learn it from someone else because it's a science. It's a natural process. There are, for example, in nature, certain rhythms which are associated with planets. In the human being, for example, we have cycles associated with the sun, cycles associated with the moon. The sleep cycle, for example, is tied to the sun. My body just came from the other side of the earth 3 days ago, but it still is aligned to the energy of that other side and undergoes the same sleep cycle, feeling sleepy as if the body was there. The other cycles associated with the moon. Let me take an example first with the sun. You take shells in the water which open and close with the tides. Okay? That's related to the sun cycle as well as the position of the moon. And these are, let's say, on the beach of, what's the nearest beach here? Myrtle Beach. Okay? Take them from the beach, put them on top of a mountain in the middle of the United States. Now they have no water movement. You put them in an aquarium. They have no water movement to tell them what the current rhythm is. So after closing and opening a few times, they stop, they're confused, and then they resynchronize and start opening all together as if there was a beach on that location and the tides at that point. Now there's no beach, there are no tides there. But they're synchronized to the sun and the moon in such a way they sense the rhythm as if the tides were happening around them. Amazing. The human body similarly is synchronized with many such cycles related to different planets. And if you could represent them in an image symbol, you have the horoscope, symbolizing a certain energetic pattern imprinting upon you. And what can you do with it? Well, like any other symbol, you can play with it, manipulate it to modify things. You're not bound by that symbol. Remember, if you move an object, it has a ripple effect on the connection. Your whole body has parts which align to those centers energetically. So even in astrology, the head, for example, aligns to the first sign of the zodiac, the neck to the second sign, the shoulders and heart to the fourth sign, and so on, all the way down. And when in your chart those energies are somehow misaligned or in conflict, in the biology you will find there are patterns of disturbance in those parts. Interesting. Because we are a symbol, not just of the consciousness which inhabits, but because that consciousness is one with the universe, we are a symbol of the whole universe. Within us, everything that exists out there is somehow represented because we are the most evolved symbol. The whole universe, preparing to relate to the whole universe, everything is linked here somehow. And if we turn deeper behind the sense of the form, we can sense all those energies and their waves as they happen within us. Like the shells could experience the relationship with the sun and moon from wherever they were. We're just not conscious. We're too busy, turned outward, unconscious of what's happening within us. The tides of energies inside. But once in a while we have a sensation of this. You go in a crowded place, you come back feeling weird because you caught an infection energetically. And these little experiences tell us that we are more than just what we seem to appear here. We are much more an energy, much less a body. We are much more awareness and less energy. And if you go back a few steps, remember the form is a symbol of what is behind. You can manipulate what is behind and the form changes. I'm going to show you an example of how far this can go. And these are medically documented cases. There are people who have multiple personalities. You've heard about this perhaps. What's interesting is when the personality shifts, it's a different person, a different memory, different behavior, sometimes different language, and they don't know each other. Now remember, the personality switching, the body is exactly the same. Except you notice, this personality A, for example, has diabetes, and sugar triggers the diabetic response. Personality B does not have diabetes and can eat as much sugar as he wants without the trigger response of sugar, diabetes. Personality C needs to wear specs because he's myopic. Personality B is completely normal in vision. When the personality shifts, the entire biological functioning changes to match the energy imprint of the personality. Now you see what this means potentially. Our entire body, biology, medical processes and problems including are symbolic of the energy imprint of what you are. If you can correct at an energetic level internally, your biological functioning will change. Your illness will be eliminated. The illness is symbolic of a knot in your energy body, in your vital pranic body. And the vital pranic knot is symbolic or an expression of the state of your mind and awareness. Let's take an example. Somebody in childhood had a trauma. You grew up in a space where you had bombs falling, perhaps. That was an example which you shared. And every time you try to sleep, the memory of the bombs is there. But where is the memory? In your consciousness. And something in that creates a knot, a resistance, a block. I don't want to hear. I want to run away. I don't want to be here. And that tightness becomes imprinted in the energy pattern, which is specific to you, which then represents a tightness in the body. And you can see how the body shapes itself to match the energy pattern. Somebody has built up a habit of hatred. I hate X. Doesn't matter what. Every time you experience hatred, there's a tightness where? In the abdomen, lower abdomen particularly. That's where you experience hatred, jealousy, passions of any kind. The tightness there, energetic, triggered by a thought of that person. Every time that image comes on TV, tightness. Every time the memory comes, tightness of energy. The energy tightness now repeating becomes very quickly a habit. What is stress? Tightness repeated until it forgot what it's like to be relaxed, and it stays on. You go to sleep and the same state of your day's stress, tightness stays. You did not undo the tightness of the day's stress. You cannot, because you are in it, let's say 12 hours, if you're working very hard. And the time you give to relax is a few minutes or seconds, not enough. So some tightness stays, and every day you add to it until the tightness becomes the norm, the shape of your energy. And right there in the belly. And very quickly, in a few months or in a few years, eventually, the tightness of the energy becomes the tightness in the biological functioning, blocking the natural flow of juices or processes. And you have a bile problem or a digestion problem or a sleep problem or a whatever problem it is. If you had the inner sight, clairvoyant sight, you would see this tightness in the energy of your vital body. You would see it as a knot, And you could predict, oh yeah, if you don't set that right soon enough, a few years down you're going to have that problem, whatever that pattern is. Interesting. The body is a symbol of the energy. Energy body is a symbol of the mind consciousness, which is eventually a symbol of the soul's imprint that it brings. Except that the human body is much more complex. It's not just under influence of the soul's imprint, but many other imprints, and everything combines to make this symbol. So when Sri Aurobindo says this, now you can see how much sense it makes. But generally all forms are symbols. The body of ours, this body of ours is a symbol of our real being, and everything is a symbol of some higher reality. I'll touch briefly upon one more symbol, which is perhaps your favorite, that you like to play with or acquire or accumulate, which is the symbol of money. We'd spoken about it in detail some years ago, but for many of you it might still be new. So, what is money? When somebody gives you a $100 bill, what's the value of that? It's paper with ink printed on it. What asserts or assures its value? There's a signature in there which says that I promise to pay the bearer the sum of so many dollars. That's the language in India. In the US, this is a valid. What is that? This is valid token for any kind of debt, something like that, of value of $100, signed by the governor of the Federal Reserve. That signature is what gives it power. You remove the signature, the money is worthless. The paper is worthless. Now hang on, what do you do with the $100? If you go back to the person who signed it and say, give me $100, what does he give you? He gives you something else which represents the $100. You exchange it for gold, you exchange it for another paper, 100 euros or whatever the exchange rate currently is. But what is money itself? It's not a physical thing. It's an idea even, and energy behind. And all money is symbol of something which is abstract wealth. And Sri Aurobindo explains this, that the money in its essence is a power, an energy, belongs to the domain of life energy. The symbol is what ties to it. Remember, the connection is two-way. If there is more money, the symbols of it will grow. If you bring the symbols, you attract also the money power. But there's something else. The symbol may be static because the form is fixed, but the energy which it represents is dynamic. It is also conscious. And if you do not handle the symbols properly, the consciousness that it represents, it doesn't like it. If it does not like you or does not like your space, it can say, I don't want to stay here, I want to get away. And when it wants to get away, it drags the symbols with it. Interesting. So this is the idea we have in almost all the old traditions, that you can pray for or invoke the money power. And in India we have a special day of the year when you worship that which the money power represents. Actually, that represents much more than just money, but Lakshmi is normally associated with the aspect of money or plenitude. Lakshmi Puja. And there are some other colors or symbols or foods associated with that, which also you try to evoke that presence. When you take the symbols, and there's a connection to the power, if you arrange the symbols in a certain way, remember that's the concept of ritual, it can amplify the power. If you put them in the disarray, it weakens the power. Open your purse when you go back to your room. Look at the notes that you've placed. The mother used to place them face front, not upside down, straight, and put them in sequence. The larger notes at the back, the smaller notes in front. Now imagine what that would do if you could arrange the notes in this way to be in perfect harmony with each other, sequentially, correctly aligned. Do it, and then feel what happens to your purse. You will feel that the money power is aligned, harmonious, and happy, content. It can rest. When it's in disarray, crushed or twisted or somehow crumpled and stuffed in, it's being squeezed, it's not happy, it's not somehow in harmony, it's not aligned. Get me out of here. It wants to jump out, go away. And it does go away if you don't respect it the right way. But it's not in the physical symbol of money is only one of these references. Remember, we are the symbol of the universe. We have a relation directly with the money power. You can draw it. And it has a rhythm of play, which you can play with. And if you know how to play it, and you can work that relationship effectively, you can attract money power. You know, there are people who have that ability. Somehow whatever they touch blooms, grows financially. There are others who have a problem. I'll share with you my experience on this. You see, my mother sits in one of the offices in the ashram where she also is responsible for selling books. And a few times I had to sit there. And by temperament, I tend to shrink from too much contact. So I was sitting there and there would be someone passing by, and instinctively something within me would shrink. And generally I found when I was sitting there were not many sales. And there was another person, whenever he was there, there would be lots of sales. And I looked at myself and I said, yeah, you know what, subliminally, I'm not conscious here, but subliminally, I just don't want anyone to come. I want to be alone and do my work. So actually putting a barrier. And I said, this is not good. I have to correct it. At least I should be able to correct it, even if And so I made that correction internally. And the result was people flowing in and out, and lots of sales took place. I did it for a few days, but I was overwhelmed. I couldn't handle that energetic inflow, outflow. It was too much. So I kind of shut it down. And people who have that kind of energy, who enjoy that kind of exchange, they are the ones who are able to build and create, and the money power flows in them. You can feel it in their aura. It enjoys the flow and the play, thriving, flowing. The families which are supported by one person, I had this example of a wealthy family which used to come from Calcutta, and my teacher, MP Pandit, was pointed to the grandmother. I said, she is the one who holds the Lakshmi power. And once she goes, they won't have the same thing. And we saw that after she passed away, the family fell into severe distress financially. And then they went into all kinds of Vastu corrections and all that. Nothing worked. Because the basis within was not aligned. But it can be done, that's the point. And the whole concept of Vastu, Feng Shui, etc. is basically this. Walk into someone's room, observe the things there, you can describe the person. Your arrangement of things in the room is symbolic of your state of consciousness, is an expression, embodiment of your state of consciousness. Everything perfectly in order, you know internally that's how the person is. Things pell-mell, chaos, you cannot find what you want, you know what the internal state is. And notice what happens when you do spring cleaning or just rearranging. And most of us don't like to do it. But when you actually do it, you spend half a day or a whole day doing it, everything's so beautiful and tidy, but inside you feel clear and beautiful and tidy. That's the power of the symbol. It works both ways. It represents the higher truth, but also modifying it corrects or changes things in the higher consciousness. Fascinating. Our life is a symbol of our consciousness. The mother puts it differently. She says, our life is a mirror of what you are. When you have a problem, and a particularly sticky problem, look inside yourself. What is it in you that is inviting or provoking that problem? Correct that internally, and the problem will go away. Interesting, isn't it? So you can look at it another way. The mirror reflecting you provokes you to correct what otherwise you would never see. So think of it as life is helping you to set right or correct for some problem. See, you can look at the same thing in different ways, but we're looking at an essential truth behind. Numbers are symbols the same way. Colors are symbols. Everything is symbol. So I won't go deeper into this idea. You get the hang of it. Everything is symbolic, and that means by manipulating the symbol, you can, and you are the greatest symbol. Now, when I look into myself, and remember those tendencies within me, something shrinking, something insufficiently developed, something exaggerated, something unbalanced in harmony with some other part of me, all of that could be represented symbolically and is represented in my room's arrangement, for example. But if I had to start working on myself, what would be the map by which I could assess what I need to develop, what I need to set right, what I need to grow? What is the map that would indicate the completeness of all of my capacity? Or what is that essential map by which everything else would be developed to full capacity? If you look internally, there are certain powers you have which are essential, which make for everything else. And if those you could map out, that would give you an indication. And now we come to the two symbols of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Both are such essential maps, but different aspects of reality. Sri Aurobindo's symbol is a map. The two triangles, there's one triangle pointing down, one triangle pointing up. The triangle pointing down is Sat Chit Ananda. It's the divine consciousness turning, pouring downward to manifest. The triangle pointing up is matter, life, mind. The three grades of consciousness which are struggling to rise, to get beyond their limitation and recover, realign with their divine origin. And this is the nature of the cosmos. The upper flowing to manifest into the lower which is awakening from the darkness, the self-loss, the forgetfulness, which we heard so beautifully from Vladimir. The lower struggling to recover its origin, its divinity and completeness and perfection. Where the two meet is the square. The square is the link point between the upper three and the lower three, what Sri Aurobindo calls the supra-mental consciousness. And it is that, when it is fully active, who bridges the highest and the lowest, makes possible the divine possibilities on earth. And therefore, within the square is, what do you see? Waters. In the Veda, the waters are symbols of the planes. 7 planes, the entire cosmos, divinized, manifested with divinity. And within that, the lotus representing the avatar. As a symbol, the flower is fascinating. Lotus emerges out of the mud, grows to bloom not only this beauty and perfume, but notice the lotus leaves, they are in the water, they're never wet. Are you familiar with that? Those of you who have not seen lotuses may not know this, but there's a special characteristic of the lotus leaves, they are never wet. And it's a symbol of the poise of detachment of our consciousness. Our soul lives in life, it is never sticky, never attached. It can flow through all experiences without getting stuck anywhere. That's how it should be. And so the lotus is, even the name in Sanskrit is Pankaja, that which is born out of the mud. Born in the mud or out of the mud, but not belonging to the mud. That's you. That's our souls as they emerge. And the lotus here represents the avatar, the perfect, divinized human being. The mother's symbol, on the other hand, is very different. It's not got straight lines. It's not the structure. is the flowing energy that manifests in the cosmos, which constructs, builds the cosmos and builds everything in the cosmos. And the flowing energy, therefore, all circular, everything is flowing. And it originates from the center, which represents the divine Shakti, the divine mother, from whom everything moves and flows. And then the four petals immediately around it are the four powers of the divine mother as she manifests. We had some discussion around this in the last retreat. But the first aspect is the power of vast knowledge. All knowledge, embracing everything, aware of everything, containing everything. Nothing is left out. Everything is known perfectly, entirely, intimately, flawlessly. Now you'll see why this is the first. We'll see this shortly. The second is the aspect of power, energy, execution, breaking through barriers, overcoming resistances, which is the knowledge activated into movement, without which knowledge would be, well, impotent. But power, as it acts, must emerge from knowledge, otherwise it would be the bull in the china shop, destructive often, uncontrolled, unbalanced, erroneous even. So the power has to emerge from the knowledge, and that's why it's the second aspect. But the power as it flows has a huge complex work to do to execute. And so the third aspect is that of harmony, which puts all things in their right relation. If you did not put all your efforts in perfect alignment, in synchronicity, you would have disaster. Things would be unbalanced. Things just wouldn't work. And when everything is in perfect alignment, in synchronicity, it just happens effortlessly, flawlessly. You're familiar with the Japanese concept of just-in-time management. Everything is activated to be in perfect alignment with everything else. You do not need storage space. Everything comes at the right time, at the right place, and it's done. That's the nature of the harmony. Even if you need storage space, there's a perfect harmony of how much comes in, how much goes out, and everything is held in relation, right relation to each other. And then the fourth aspect is that which completes. What is all this working towards? To complete the form, to make the outcome, the result, perfectly, without distortion, without limitation, exactly as needed. I would say these four are extremely important in their sequence and in their role in everything in the universe. The whole universe flows and operates because of the working of these four. But we take an example of what it's like in our lives. Look at a company and how it works. Many of you are coming from that background, so it's an appropriate example. First, you have an idea, a concept, even an ideal. Often you articulate this in vision statement or mission statements. And if you don't have the reference of what it is you want to do, well, whatever you do will be pretty much meaningless. Your energies will be scattered. Every time that you're acting, you're working, and you have a conflict. Should we do this more? Should we do this less? Should we do this at all? You refer back to that, the knowledge. Is this aligning with our overall purpose, vision? If not, well, no. We modify, we moderate, modulate. In an action of a company, the top, the board, is the one which sets the overall vision, the scheme, what we want to do. And then second level is the executives. Their job is to take that vision and turn it into dynamic action, the energy power. The first level we call Maheshwari, the vast knowledge. Second level is the Mahakali, the dynamizing principle and power, overcoming resistance and opposition, breaking through barriers where necessary. The third level is Mahalakshmi, and this is where represented in the company by the managers. They are the ones who are putting in alignment the different pieces to make possible, and going back to the executives. But they make possible, they organize. And then at the last stage, the Mahasaraswati aspect is represented by the person on the ground who finally assembles, puts together, executes, makes perfect. In the hotel business, it's the people that you're meeting on the ground. They are the ones who represent and actualize, make at a practical level what was your overall goal and purpose for creating this space. They're all in the right place at the right time, know exactly what to do and make everything perfect. And this last step of perfection in matter is extremely important. The nature of matter is it does not tolerate imperfection. At the level of thought, you can get away with something which is not perfectly articulated because not everyone sees the thought's completeness or perfection. At the level of emotion, similarly, you can express something and get away with something approximate. But the moment you materialize it, one flaw and it's visible objectively, and it bumps into something which needs this perfection and it fails. And so this fourth aspect is often the most demanding. In the project, you build a hotel, the first initial process goes quite fast. You have the conception, you make the drawings, the engineering calculations, then the assembly process takes place, which also goes somewhat fast. But the last step, the finishing, making perfect, that's the longest, the most demanding, the most challenging for everybody, isn't it? And it is so in everything. This is how the governments are structured. This is how the military is structured. This is how any work, any operation is structured. This is how the human being is designed, interestingly. The head, the knowledge is here. The strength is in the arms, shoulders, upper part of the chest. The harmonizing, organizing, digestion is in the abdomen. And then the feet represent the movement, the perfect steps. Not so obvious, but the fingers would be more obvious, fingers and feet. They are the points where you make the last point of contact for perfection. So, the first movement when the divine flows to manifest is this fourfold action. Each one of us is naturally aligned to one or more of these, effortlessly. That's how we are. Some of us are naturally thought people, knowledge people. Some of us are naturally leaders, action, adventurers. Some of us are naturally organizers, arrangers, harmonizers. People's person often. And the fourth is some of us naturally are craftsmen. We make perfect in what we do. Now remember, any project requires all four. And if some of us are naturally aligned and skilled in one of these four, then if we have to work as a team, we should make sure the team is complete, all four powers represented. If not, that's where your flaw will be in the project. When you have repeated patterns of error in a project, observe what's missing in this fourfold organization. Let's say you are your own project, you are a writer, okay? You have to do all four, including the last step of typing, which is the fourth, or writing by hand. You have all four. If something is not working out, observe where the gap is in the four levels of the consciousness. From a conception of a vision, I'm going to write the world's greatest novel, at least in intention. In my mind, I create the perfect scheme. My story is so fascinating. If people read it, they would all be amazed. But somehow when I start writing, it doesn't quite work out. People read my manuscript and say, boring. I'm saying, but it's actually very interesting, don't you get it? So between my conception and internal experience of the story to the actual writing, there's a gap. Where? So obviously from here to there are two layers in between, including the last layer. In the way I word it, I might get that quite right. But in the way I translate my concept into the energy aspect of it. In the way I organize the elements of my story to make it interesting. Those may be the gaps. Observe. And when all four elements are perfectly aligned, when all four aspects are perfectly aligned, the thing flows. it's done. An effective team will be one where all four are represented but integrated internally. Now, what is it that can integrate the four? Interesting question. One of them can dominate the other three. That's not integration. Often it happens in a company where one side dominates and it weakens. Over time, the thing fails. You need perfect integration with each side doing what it does perfectly in its own terms. What can unify all four? Remember the picture? Yes?
I think common vision.
Common vision. Come back to the center. It's the center from which all four emerged. When all four lean back on the center, that's your focal point around which all four can be harmonized. Because the way it works, all four are essential. You cannot say this is inferior. There's a sequence in the chain of action, but each is equally important. So you cannot say just because you are the footman at the last step that you are less important. You know, recently there were some explosions of the Tesla car. Elon Musk, eventually after the study, they discovered there was one person on the assembly line who was sabotaging. How important is that? You can't say you're a worker, so you're less important. They're the ones who are executing and making perfect, intentionally or by mistake. They can mess it up. So all four being equally important, the one thing which can hold is the one which expresses all four. So you go back to the core, and I'm going to use a word here, the soul of the project, the soul of the team. As you articulated it, the idea which brought us together, not just the idea of the project, the idea which brought us together, which then we formed as the idea of the project, the original vision. And that's the point around which everything has to coalesce and organize. Now, these four powers, as they move into action, they have specific qualities in the execution which are needed to make that action effective and complete. And those become now the 12 petals around the four. So the vocabulary that Sri Aurobindo and the mother used to describe this is interesting. So I go back to reading when the precision of the word is important. The way the mother describes, the central circle represents the Supreme Mother, the Mahashakti. The four central petals are the four aspects of the mother, and the 12 petals, her 12 attributes. In another explanation, she says, the 12 petals represent the 12 powers of the mother manifested for her work. Now, this is the critical element required for the manifestation to be effective. And I read from another letter of Sri Aurobindo. This again goes quite deep, but we'll just look at the overall idea. He writes, essentially, the 12 powers are the vibrations that are necessary for the complete manifestation. You can have a manifestation, but it may not be complete, it may not be perfect. The 12 powers are the vibrations that are necessary. The 4 powers are active, but the vibrations necessary. And we'll elaborate on this shortly. And then he says something quite interesting. These are the 12 seen from the beginning above the mother's head. Thus, there are really 12 rays of the sun, not 7, 12 planets, etc. This takes us into, the symbolism and the occult side of the knowledge. And for now, suffice it to say that unless the 12 are there, you do not have the perfect and the complete manifestation. Now, what are these 12? And you see here, they're described as attributes, powers, or the names in sequence that the mother gives are sincerity, humility, gratitude, perseverance. The first 4 set, which we will be elaborating upon this afternoon. These 4 are like a foundation. Without this base, you cannot do anything. And we'll see why. You might ask yourself, well, why do you need humility? Gratitude, what should you be grateful for? Why is it so important? And we'll see, we will explore that a little more. Perseverance, it's obvious. If you do not persevere, you'll never reach. But what is this sincerity thing? What does it mean to be sincere? Think about it. Can you define sincerity? You know, we sense, when we use the word, we sense, oh, that guy is not sincere. But what do you mean by it exactly? If you try to find the right words to explain, you're not quite sure. It's one of those very complex, essential ideas or experiences you don't have words to express. And you'll see how the mother explains it and how we can articulate and put into practice. So these are the first four, which are like a foundation. The second four are what make possible the execution. So, aspiration, receptivity, progress, courage. Again, some are quite obvious. Courage is obvious. Unless you have courage, well, you would not even be able to do something extraordinary. What is this aspiration thing? And why? What receptivity to what? We'll be elaborating upon that tomorrow. And the last four is how this manifesting movement relates to the whole world, to everything else around it. Because after all, anything you do as a project does not stand in isolation. It can only exist in relation to the rest of the universe. And if something is out of sync there, you are as if opposing the universe, or you're opposed by the universe. So what's the relationship of what you're doing with the universe that you have to set right? And these are the four powers: goodness, generosity, equanimity, peace. Again, some are obvious: generosity, goodness, oh yeah, that's what makes for goodwill. Equanimity, you can guess perhaps in the face of difficulties, but peace, what is that and why is it so essential? And like the four powers, which are each equally important, these 12 attributes or qualities are equally important. And as we will be exploring them, we will also be introspecting, and we will see where we lack and what is it we need to do for correcting it. And so it's going to be a introspective, exploratory journey over these 12 as we go along. The focus of this discussion was to become conscious of what is this idea of symbol, what the Mother's and Sraddhalu's symbol represent. And remember, the Mother's symbol is the whole manifesting Shakti. What we're doing in life is always manifesting. The Aurobindo symbol showing you the creation in which you operate, but that by which you operate is this which is represented by Mother's symbol, the Shakti that actualizes. Each one of us in our life is expressing this Shakti. The symbol of the Mother is not only Mother's symbol, it is a symbol of everything that is divine trying to manifest in matter. You as a soul is the center, or the power of your soul is the center, represent or operating through its 12 powers, through its 4 powers, which form the imprint, or their lack or their imbalance or balance forms the imprint of your temperament, and then the 12 attributes through which you have an effective, complete manifestation. Now, to step back briefly on the 4, remember I said all of us are primarily aligned to one or more of these. Even if you have more than one of them is still the more dominant, and that makes for your temperament. I often would give an example of how you recognize this. Let's say we are all next to a swimming pool. None of us know how to swim, and somebody has jumped in and is drowning, shouts help. What's your first instinctive response? Without thinking, what would you do? Jump? Okay, then you are the Kshatriya type. adventurer type, the leadership type. You don't think, you just act. Good for you, but sometimes it gets you into trouble. Often you're in more trouble and you regret certain actions. I wish I had thought before acting. Okay? But there's the other type which says, let me see, what's the best action? I look around. Okay, there's a stick. There's a rope or something which can float, I can throw in to help. The thought action is first, and then action follows. The second type is the one who will say, well, he's in trouble, I jump. I don't care if I can swim or not. Let's figure out later how to swim. It works sometimes. That's what makes for heroes. Then you wouldn't be a hero if you had thought it out. You'd be a good strategist, but not a hero. The third type says, what's in it for me? Oh, well, okay, I'm putting it a bit negatively. There's a calculation. Hey, why don't you help him? Help, somebody, he needs help. There's a transactional thought in it. And if you think that it's not worth your risking it, then you would prefer to take a secondary role. If it's your best friend and there is a whole investment involved, then perhaps you would take a greater engagement with it. And the fourth type perhaps would, depending on the skill acquired, would be either helpless and wait for others to deal with, or apply that skill that he has or doesn't have. But you see, the first instinctive reaction is defining one of these four impulses within us. And some of us are more richly developed, meaning we have more than one facet developed. Some of us have more than one facet developed but not integrated. When I'm in my thought mode, I can give you a very clear strategy. When I'm in my impulse mode, I forget all logic. Aurobindo makes this comment, this is 100 years ago, about a particular community or type in India. You see, India is very rich in human types. Literally all human types are represented in a very small space. We are the world represented in one big country. He speaks of the Bengali. He speaks of the heart being so developed, the mind being so developed, but not integrated. They're passionate, they're brilliant in thought, but the passion and the thought somehow, they struggle to synchronize. Now this is 100 years ago, it might have changed today, very likely has changed. But I take it as an example because Sri Aurobindo shows this as an example. And there are people in whom one or more are developed but not integrated. Now our goal to be effective instruments, to be effective in life, in manifestation, is to develop all four facets and integrate them. And if you're able to do that, when you're able to do that, that's really your journey of evolution. When you're able to do that, you are a complete vehicle for the divine manifestation. What comes from the divine inspiration working through your soul acts through these four facets of your personality and the 12 qualities for perfect action, complete action in everything you do. There are a few people like that. Very few in history. The greatest in history often have had 2 or 3 of these developed and integrated, which made them so extraordinarily great. They could conceive, they could execute, they were leaders, they were organizers, and they were perfect executioners in everything they did. There are a few like that. One such example which immediately comes to mind was Leonardo da Vinci. If you've seen that. The scope of his knowledge, the breadth and depth was spanning every field. From physics to optics to biology to sociology to military strategy to linguistics to art, mathematics and everything. He literally defined an age because of what he had just in the sweep of his knowledge. But he didn't just think it out and write books. He did things with that knowledge. As an artist, of course, you see that much more, but you do not see so much more of the machines that he built. And they all worked, almost. And then, you see the execution. in the way he wrote, in the way he drew. The art is perfectly down to the detail, and the content of his ability to manage people. It's almost like you see a smooth life, no problems. He's able to do whatever he wants to do, navigate through circumstances, get it done. And an extraordinary energy. It is said that he slept only 1 hour in the day. And that 1 hour was split over 4 pieces of 15 minutes each. That's not humanly possible. Obviously, the depth of the sleep he had was unusual. It was almost a spiritual trance. He was a mystic. And he could draw energy from within. And the enormous work that he did was the work that perhaps an entire civilization would have done, a single person doing. How do you explain that? Because the energy that poured through him was not just his human energy. It was that inspired divine energy pouring through, but a vehicle which was fully developed, able then to channel through that divine possibility. And as a reference, each one of us should be able to do that, or the extent to which we grow close to that possibility makes for our effectivity and worth in the world. Now, most of you are involved in projects of some kind or other. If you put this as the backdrop, use the work you do, the project you do as a reference for developing yourself and your innate potential in this way, by this reference, you can also grow in this direction. If you're working as a team, you work together as a team to fulfill these. Where I lack, someone else fits. Where they lack, someone else fits. And as a team, we grow to become the complete symbol. You see? And to the extent that you're able to manifest this symbol of the Mother, you become effective and complete. Individually and collectively. And then as a society. And then as a nation. And as a humanity. So the theme was titled Manifesting the Mother's Symbol, and now you can understand what that means much more deeply. That's what we're here to do. That's our work. You could play around with the form of the symbol, but the principle 1, 4, 12 would be irrespective. We are the symbol for the divine manifestation. We can dwell on this for a while. Hold an aspiration for what we must become and fulfill, what we hold as a potential within. For a few minutes of silence. We'll have time for questions in the afternoon session where we will take up the elaboration of the 12 powers. We can give form to our aspiration symbolically by chanting Om 3 times.